This week in Idaho, St. Luke's cancels flying the pride flag for June. The May 20th elections conclude with voters backing levies and rejecting bonds. And the DOJ sues an Idaho town for denying a conservative church's permit. Also, Trump cuts $49 million in Idaho health grants. That and so much more. This is the Yocal Idaho Midweek Report, where we give you an overview of the news in Idaho for the last week. Welcome! I hope you're all having an amazing week, especially coming off the 3-day weekend where we remember and celebrate those who gave their lives so that we could enjoy the freedoms we do today. In honor of them, I decided to go a little bit more military American festive. If you can comment down below, if you're also listening to the video version, you can try to guess what my pin is. I don't know if the camera will have enough resolution for you to see it or not. But also I got my nice tie here that's got the, it's not the coat of arms, but you have the different American flag and kind of eagle there all together. So a nice ensemble to celebrate Memorial Day. But especially with the 3-day weekend, I hope beyond just remembering those that gave their lives, you were able to enjoy it a little bit with some fishing/boating, something that I really wish I could have done, but didn't quite happen, hiking, or just relaxing at home. Which that last one is the one that I did. Had some good food and shared some stories, reminiscing with some veterans and different people. It was very good and was also very welcome. This spring has been very busy. Hopefully yours has been in a good way. But transitioning into the stories today, which we will be very busy with. The first half, as you just heard a few minutes ago, will be about pride flags, elections, and churches, or a church in particular. But for the middle, we also have some fascinating stories as well. With a nationally known detransitioner, updates on the snow melt, which for any of us that love our AC, right now I wish mine was working a little bit better. It is important to know about that here in Idaho. And news about changes to the DMV that were affected with the last 2025 legislative session. And then to close out, we have some GOP news with a new executive director, drones, and fireworks. So stick with us to the end here. June approaches. For some of us, that is a joy and dread. St. Luke's health system won't be flying the pride flag at its medical centers this year. A very welcome surprise. Our state's largest hospital network made this change after what they call a contentious, end quote, environment around the issue. An internal memo was obtained by Idaho Family Policy Center, revealing St. Luke's told senior staff they won't raise the flags because public debates have diverted focus, end quote, from their original intent. The hospital started flying these flags back in 2002, claiming they wanted to show support for marginalized groups. But thousands of Idahoans pushed back. The Idaho Family Policy Center mobilized over thousands of people who sent messages to St. Luke's demanding they stop politicizing healthcare. Also, there's a lot of Christians that kind of work in St. Luke's, so that might have also had an effect. IFPC calls this, quote, a major victory, end quote, for families who do not want radical ideologies pushed on them when they seek medical care. St. Luke says they're exploring alternative displays with their LGBTQIA+, that is a new alphabet soup, they keep coming up with more, employee resource group. And they plan to keep sponsoring pride festivals across our state. While this represents some progress, the battle is still not over, as you can tell on that topic. Though this does show what happens when Idahoans speak up. You do have a big effect, and your voice does matter. And especially with hospitals that should focus on healing people and not advancing major woke political agendas, especially in a conservative state. And speaking of having your voices heard, Idaho's May 20th election that happened last week sent mixed signals on school funding, with voters rejecting most bonds while approving levies. The results highlight growing taxpayer skepticism about endless funding requests. But breaking that down, we'll start over in eastern Idaho that saw Shelley voters decisively reject a $78.6 million bond with only 38% support, the district's second failure in 2 years. Fillers also had a $52 million bond crash with just 22% approval. These defeats cost districts $130 million in proposed facilities. Then coming to the Treasure Valley, the trend continued, with Middleton's $19.9 million bond failing despite 53% of support, making the district's 7th rejection since 2018. Now, you might also be asking why 53%, that's a majority. For the bonds, they need a supermajority, so it needs to be far greater than 53%. Just a little context there. Also, though, a little bit of a change, over in Parma and Valley View, they passed operational levies for staff and repairs. And then moving up north, Northern Idaho did buck the trend entirely. Post Falls, Lakeland, and Bonner County all secured substantial levies after previous failures. Coeur d'Alene even approved a $16.4 million fire department bond. The contrast does reveal voters' priorities. They'll generally, it seems, fund daily operations through simple majority levies, but resist major capital projects requiring 2/3 approval. That's where that supermajority comes in. Though it is sad to say that this last election happened with a turnout of only 10%, where some complain that the people most affected by these property tax increases didn't really vote on the measures that would affect them. This does, though, raise a critical question. After the legislature this year, if you listen to this podcast regularly and consider subscribing, increased education funding significantly, why do schools immediately ask taxpayers for more? Perhaps districts should demonstrate better stewardship of existing resources before requesting additional funds. These results do seem to suggest Idahoans want accountability alongside funding, that they're not against doing it as long as they know it's accountably being put, or having growing awareness of giving schools more funding. These results do suggest, though, that Idahoans want accountability alongside funding, that they're not truly against funding for schools and things like that, but they want it to be accountable and they want to have a return on investment for their tax dollars. And speaking of Northern Idaho, the Department of Justice, speak of things going from national to local, has filed a federal lawsuit this week against the Idaho city of Troy, alleging the town violated religious freedom laws. The case centers on Christ Church's efforts to establish a church in the small Latah County town. Now, a little bit of a lead up to this so you understand what all is going on. Christ Church's Troy campus, now called Christ the Redeemer, had outgrown its meeting space and needed a new location. If a church is doing well, that generally seems to happen. Church elder Matt Myers owned a former bank building in Main Street in Troy's commercial district. That will be a key part as we go on. And applied for a conditional use permit so the congregation could meet there. Now, this is where things get interesting and the issue starts. Troy's commercial zone already allows non-religious gatherings like art galleries, museums, and auditoriums. But when Christ Church applied, the city council held a public hearing where residents voiced strong opposition to the church's beliefs and presence in their community. The DOJ alleges residents made comments like, quote, "They are evil people spreading evil beliefs," and expressed concerns about church's controversial pursuits, end quote. Troy ultimately denied the permit, citing that, quote, "great majority of city residents opposed it," end quote. Federal prosecutors say this violates RLUIPA, the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act, which protects churches from discrimination in zoning decisions. Troy's city attorney insists the denial was about parking, traffic concerns, and not religion. Assistant Attorney General Harmeet Dillon was clear, quote, "RLUIPA forbids local governments from deciding zoning matters based on the dislike of any certain religious groups." The case highlights ongoing tensions as churches seek to serve growing communities across our state, and the effects of college towns on rural areas, with Moscow not being the most conservative/Christian area. Granted, that's changing a little bit. And speaking of things on the national level, the Trump administration recently cut nearly $50 million in federal grants that were flowing to our state's Department of Health and Welfare. These cuts happened back in March as part of a much larger effort to eliminate what the administration calls wasteful spending on outdated COVID programs. The money that got cut breaks down like this. About $29 million was going towards childhood vaccination programs, $13.3 million to support mental health services, and nearly $7 million to fund substance abuse programs. Not sure what that has to do with COVID, but all these grants are traced back to pandemic-era funding that provided what officials call, quote, "a one-time infusion," end quote, of federal dollars. As for the reasons for the cut, Health and Human Services say they're done spending taxpayer money on COVID response, since Americans have moved past the pandemic years ago. Instead, they want to focus funding on addressing chronic diseases and making America healthy again. Our state's health department has assured that ongoing programs won't be affected, and they say that they've prepared exit strategies to handle the transition smoothly and minimize any disruptions from those losing one-time pandemic grants. If you've made it through the first part of the stories, do us a favor and hit the like button so we know that you enjoyed the episode, and consider subscribing/following us on YouTube, Rumble, or Twitter/Substack so we can stay connected with you and you can get this midweek report every week. And speaking of biological reality, last week, Chloe Cole visited the Old State Saloon in Eagle to share her powerful story, with about 70 people in person and thousands more watching online. Cole, for those not familiar, has become one of the most recognized voices in the detransitioner movement after her own journey through and out of the gender transition phase. Cole described how she felt uncomfortable in her body as a young girl, and how medical professionals pushed her towards transition. At just 13 years old, doctors prescribed her puberty blockers, followed by testosterone and a double vasectomy at 15. She said doctors excluded her parents from conversations and threatened that she would commit suicide without transition. About a year after surgery, Cole regretted everything. She felt lost and said what she really needed was, quote, an adult that could hold me close and give me some time, end quote. But one of the most compelling parts of Cole's presentation came when she discussed how faith in Jesus Christ transformed her life. She thanked Christians who helped her during her transition and declared, quote, I chose to pick up my cross and move forward, end quote. Also, as a fun thing, and providentially, as Cole spoke about her faith, a rainbow appeared outside, if you remember last week, which Old State Saloon owner Mark Fitzpatrick captured on camera. You can go check the link below to go see that. A very fitting touch to a very heavy and impactful event. And speaking of weather, we started this year with a great snowpack across most of our state. Many basins sat well above normal levels, if you remember back in March, with some areas hitting 145% of average. If you're a child listening, you might ask, why can we have greater than 145%? Ask your parents, they'll be able to explain it way better. This gave farmers and water managers plenty of hope for 2025. But a little bit of a curveball here that spring through us. January stayed unusually dry this year after the 8th, and warm swing weather made our snow melt faster than expected. If you've been hiking, you've probably noticed that a little bit. Less water actually reached our reservoirs than officially predicted. About a quarter of our state now sits in a moderate drought condition. Granted, our state chronically sits in that. It's kind of weird we are in that, but yet things work out. But on that, and some good news, our reservoirs still look strong though. Owyhee system is filled completely, while Boise and Payette systems should hit about 100%. The upper Snake River system sits at about 88% capacity. State hydrologist David Hokima expects we'll lean heavily on reserve storage this summer rather than fresh snow melt. Despite early concerns, water officials believe we have enough stored water to get through the summer. Still though, the Twin Falls Canal Company faces a potential 63,000 acre-foot shortfall. This water storage does prove that good snowpack doesn't always guarantee an easy water year. Granted, we should be just fine. And speaking of wildlife and a little bit of naturalism getting in the way, Idaho lawmakers are pushing back hard against federal wildlife officials who refuse to move the grizzly bears from the endangered species list. On May 13th, our senators Mike Crapo and Jim Risch, along with Representative Russ Fulcher, joined colleagues from Montana and Wyoming in filing a petition to blast the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's, quote, ludicrous, end quote, decision. Here's looking at that frustration on it that our delegation had, is that our states have worked for over 40 years to rebuild grizzly populations. And for the most part, we've really succeeded. The bears have recovered so well that we now have about 80 to 100 grizzly bears roaming our forests. That could be a good or bad thing, take that as you will. Yet federal bureaucrats refuse to remove these animals from the endangered species list. This stubbornness does hurt our communities. Mainly we can see this in Boundary County. The Forest Service expects no new timber sales until 2027 because grizzly regulations restrict logging in 95% of the national forest land. The Bonners Ferry District can only harvest about 10 million board feet per year, a fraction of what the forest can actually sustainably provide. County Commissioner Lester Pinkerton put it simply, quote, "It's extremely difficult to harvest any timber. That increases fire risk and immediate danger to people's lives," end quote. There also is an economic impact. Boundary County used to receive about $1.73 million annually from the federal forest funds. This year, however, just about $413,837. We've proven, though, in conclusion, that we can manage grizzlies responsibly. And so the argument then goes, it's probably time that Washington listened to us instead of environmental activists who don't really live with the consequences of their policies, that are more focused on the animal than maybe man, which we are supposed to have dominion over creation. I don't know. Genesis. Go look at that. And speaking of officials being in the hot seat, Caldwell City officials face mounting pressure as citizens question how their tax dollars are being spent. The city released a statement this week denying they used public funds to pay Rothschild Law for legal services. Now, as for what exactly the controversy started on, Police Chief Rex Ingram faced investigation for alleged misusing public funds, though prosecutors cleared him of criminal charges, just full context there. Meanwhile, Mayor Jerome Wagner and 4 council members face a recall effort by local residents. The legal drama intensified when Rothschild Law sent cease and desist letters to recall organizer Jim Hollis, accusing him of making false statements about city officials. Citizens began to ask who pays for these legal services. In response to that, the city statement was clear. Quote, "The city of Caldwell has not paid any money to Rothschild Law for personal matters. They say the law firm represents officials, quote, only in their personal capacity," end quote. The recall effort continues, however, with organizers needing signatures by June 2nd, and citizens arguing that they deserve transparency about how their government operates and the spending of their local money. If you care about this story or any of the ones we've talked about, or see some value for someone you know, please don't hesitate to share this episode or any of the stories in it so that we can keep people informed and engaged about what's going on in our beautiful state. And speaking of officials in a medical capacity, the Idaho Board of Medicines has reached an agreement with Dr. Ryan Cole, requiring him to comply with Washington State's disciplinary order. Cole serves as our Central District Health Board, which oversees the state's largest regional public health district. Now, as for the details of what's going on here, Washington regulators restricted Cole's medical license in January of 2024 after they concluded he spread what they called COVID disinformation and prescribed ivermectin to patients through telemedicine. The Washington order limits Cole to pathology practice only and bars him from prescribing medications in that state. Cole denies the allegations and has appealed Washington's decision. However, he agreed to comply with these terms to avoid formal hearings here in Idaho. The agreement requires Cole to complete medical education courses and submit compliance reports to Idaho regulators. Idaho's Board of Medicine spokesperson Bob McLaughlin confirmed the agreement adds no additional penalties beyond Washington's original order. Cole maintains his Idaho medical license and remains active without restrictions here in Idaho. And speaking of legal proceedings, last Sunday evening, the 18th, police arrested a man after he led them on a dangerous high-speed chase near Rexburg. The incident started around 5:30 p.m. when the suspect was reportedly stalking his ex-girlfriend on South 5th West Street. Police said he followed her home and watched from his vehicle. When officers arrived, they discovered the man had active felony warrants with a nationwide extradition. Officers spotted him returning around 7:45 p.m., but he fled when he saw police. 3 Rexburg officers pursued him south on Pioneer Road. The chase became extremely dangerous when the suspect merged onto Highway 20, made a U-turn across the median, and tried to drive into oncoming traffic. He also rammed into a police vehicle, which is not going to work out too well for him. Madison County deputies assisted Rexburg police throughout the chase, and officers finally stopped the suspect using a pit maneuver at the Thornton exit. After his medical clearance, they booked him in at the Madison County Jail on charges including felony eluding and misdemeanor stalking, plus his existing warrants that were already there. This incident shows how our local law enforcement agencies work together to protect our communities from dangerous individuals who threaten others. And speaking of driving and laws, where we're sensible here in the United States, our state legislature passed several bills this year that change how the DMV operates. These laws affect everything from new license plate designs to security measures to protect your personal information. But starting with that first one, the new license plate, the Tread on Me plates, which we talked about long ago, got a redesign with a full yellow background and a centered rattlesnake, while revenue supports our Idaho Firearms Safety Committee when you purchase one of those. We're also getting the world-famous potato plates in two versions, a black and white design, very classic, plus an affordable teal and white option that costs about $2.75 plus mailing. Might have to actually look into that when I have to re-up. For security, though, the DMV staff now need background checks to access your records, which aligns with the federal Real ID standards. The department will also start asking for emergency contact information when you renew your license, though providing it remains optional, so if you don't want to give it to them, that's fine. Just a helpful thing to law enforcement if you get in a fender bender. Drivers' training rules got a little bit clearer. Instruction permits now last a full year, and parents doing driver's training must complete specific hour requirements. Meanwhile, automotive license plate readers can only be used for law enforcement purposes, not more the standard open source ones. These changes modernize our system while giving families more choices and better protection of our information with the DMV. And coming back to Boise and housing, which is the main thing that causes a lot of drivers, the southeast Boise neighborhood is fighting back against the city's imposed density. The Londoner Neighborhood Association filed a suit in May challenging the city council's approval of 189 apartments near Boise State. If you've been around there recently or lived here long enough, you'll know they're putting them up everywhere. The developer originally wanted to build 43 single-family townhomes in 2021, but the Planning and Zoning Commission demanded higher density instead. A rare thing when you get out into Canyon County, but Ada County has this thing about that. After the council approved the project in a 3 in favor, 2 against in March, frustrated residents took legal action. Attorney Brian Ertz, representing the Neighborhood Association, argues the city, quote, disregarded the concerns of the community, end quote, and pursues aggressive density policies. Residents worry about increased traffic, parking problems, and noise in their established neighborhood. The lawsuit asks a judge to overturn the council's decision, claiming the city failed to provide sufficient justification for the rezoning. This case reflects a broader tension between Boise's push for urban density and neighborhoods wanting to preserve their character. This case also highlights how development decisions affect real families who live in these communities. When city officials prioritize developers' interest over residents' concerns, granted, I will argue technically it wasn't as much for the developer. They wanted to go smaller, but they forced them to go back. I don't know. It's a different thing. It does undermine the self-governance and property rights that make Idaho communities strong, where people are involved and can actually decide on how their communities grow and are shaped. If you're at this point in the Midweek Report, probably like stuff about Idaho, so maybe consider subscribing or following us down below. That way you don't miss any of our future content, especially if you go check us out on our Substack, which we're continuing to write more and more wonderful content over there for you. And staying in Boise, students there can learn valuable trades without drowning in college debt. Dennis Technical Education Center offers hands-on training that costs far less than traditional 4-year degrees. While college tuitions can range from $40,000 to over $100,000 depending on the college, trade programs typically cost between $5,000 and $30,000, far less. Students complete DTEC programs in 6 months to 2 years instead of spending 4 years in lecture halls. Plus, it's a little bit more hands-on, where they'll learn practical skills that can help them here in Idaho or other places, particularly as they offer their welding, plumbing, electrical work, automotive repair, and healthcare assistance. Students learn by doing, not just reading textbooks, as I alluded to earlier. They graduate ready to work, often earning good wages immediately. As for a little bit of context, local employers do desperately need these jobs. It's one of the ones that are always open, just like fast food ones. While students master trades, they can fill gaps that hurt our economy. They also avoid the debt trap that some colleges can be for graduates. These careers also provide stable income and serve our communities. Students who choose trades over college often achieve financial independence faster while building things that matter. Not to say the colleges don't, but you get the idea there. DTEC proves that success doesn't require expensive degrees, just a willingness to work hard and learn useful skills. And going back to politics just briefly, the Idaho Republican Party has chosen Anthony Torino as their new executive director this week. Torino starts his role tomorrow and brings over a decade of grassroots experience from Bonneville County's Republican Central Committee. Chairman Dorothy Moon says Torino knows the party, knows people, and has proven skills in fundraising, messaging, and data security. The New York City native moved to Idaho and spent 10 years working as a technician at the Idaho National Laboratory. He also helped establish Idaho's first Veterans Vice Chair Executive Community position. As for the history on this role, the executive director, it has seen some frequent changes. Ryan Thomas held the position from September 2024 until recently. Before Thomas, the party went through several directors, including Joshua Whitworth, who served from 2012 to 2013 before joining the state's controller's office. And then Trevor Thorpe replaced Whitworth but left after about a year. Torino will handle daily operations, staff coordination, and help plan fundraising strategies for the 2026 election cycle. He looks forward to fostering the party's future success and believes great days lie ahead for Idaho. And speaking a little bit about rural Idaho, Bonners County's Sheriff's Office just got approved to buy a $17,288 drone that could save lives when people go missing. The thermal imaging drone will help deputies spot body heat through snow and thick forest areas during search and rescue missions. Who knows, they might even catch Bigfoot. That'd be a cool thing. But commissioners debated whether to buy the equipment from DJI, a Chinese company, with alleged ties to the Communist Party. Commissioner Ron Korn voted against the purchase, worried about security risks that might come with a Chinese-made technology. Quote, "I just have concerns, not knowing what the pitfalls might be," Korn said. Local residents did clarify that DJI assembles some drones in California specifically for law enforcement to avoid these spy concerns. Sheriff Darrell Wheeler pushed for the drone because they see more Alzheimer's patients and injured people who wander off and need quick rescue. Quote, "Having this tool is going to be crucial for finding these people before they succumb to the weather conditions," Wheeler explained. The commissioners approved the drone with 2 in favor, 1 against, with Brian Domke and Asian Williams supporting the purchase. And speaking about things going up in the air, but in a more patriotic way, Ashton came together earlier this month to ensure they can celebrate Independence Day with a spectacular firework display. The Freedom Street Fest fireworks fundraiser on May 16th brought the community one step closer to reaching their goal. Local chiropractor Brad Rankin chaired the event at Imperial Club, driven by his passion for the 4th of July and freedom. Quote, "I want to see Ashton put on a fantastic fireworks show every year," Rankin said. Despite competing with state tournaments and poor weather, the community showed up. The fundraiser, combined with the North Fairmont Fire District's Filler Boot campaign, raised about $6,800 towards the $7,000 goal. Local bands, the Greens and Lines and Tines, provided entertainment, while businesses like Dan's Plumbing, Big Judd's, and Four Stop Drive-In offered support. Donations continued through QR codes on local Facebook pages and at the Bank of Idaho's Ashton branch. As Rankin noted, our community is what it's all about, and it's wonderful. This grassroots effort shows how small towns preserve the traditions that matter most. Thank you for listening to the entire report. I sincerely hope you found it enjoyable and valuable. If you liked the Midweek Report, make sure to check out our other content on Substack, Twitter, or Rumble, or wherever we have it. You can find it. They're all linked together. Also, if we missed any important points or provided incorrect information, please feel free to reach out to us via email, on Twitter by tweeting us at Yocal Idaho. With the small team we have, we're not able to cover everything, but we can do our best to cover the most interesting and important stories. Thank you for your continued support and assistance. That's all for now, and I wish you a fantastic rest of your week. Godspeed.